Is this the case there? Chosam there by the case of the where the rabbis wouldn't let him get married except on Wednesday. Tamamai, the reason why he postpones the wedding, Mishum the honest, because it's an accident. He had no control over it. The rabbis won't let him get married except on Wednesday. What can he do? Nami. Here also, perhaps in the case of physical sickness, it's an accident. He didn't want to get sick. A person doesn't want to get sick, especially if it's a very serious sickness. Nobody does. Do you compare the two cases? The case of the takonis decree of the sages, you have to get married on Wednesday, and the case of getting sick, or perhaps they're not comparable. Also, they're by the case where the man cannot get married except on Wednesday, and the appointed time comes on a different day other than Wednesday. There, the accident occurred because of a decree that the rabbi decreed. That's a different paragraph. That's a different way of. And it's like that thing. Of course, he should be free from his obligation to feed her in the interim time. Also, but here, where he's talking about physical illness, perhaps he's not free from that. Only with something that's imposed upon him by the rabbi. But physical illness, he's got to pay. It's his hard luck. It's a phraseology that's used in the Gemara a lot of times. If you will find to say literally. If you will say. Beam means, and if, so you find, Lomar to say, that there is such a thing. Even though he got sick, he still has to feed her until he actually marries her, because he made an obligation. There wasn't. So what if she got sick? He didn't do anything wrong. He's ready to get married. But his bride has got 105 fever. She's laying in bed. He wants to get married. Why should he be forced to feed her in interim time? Of course, in the real world, if a person is so stingy that he won't feed his prospective bride for a few days, they forget the marriage. Who wants a cheapskate? But we're talking about a principle, a legal. What is it if she became sick? It wasn't him that's stopping the whole business. He could say to her, "Here I am ready." Again, if a groom says to his prospective bride, "I'm ready to get married," even though she's sick in bed, she would throw him away. Forget it, kid. I don't want any part of you. The insensitivity, forget it. But we're just talking about the legal principle. Or perhaps, see, we're trying to figure out the ramifications of how far something against your control frees you from an obligation that you assume. Or perhaps, she can say to him, she got sick. It wasn't him that got sick, she got sick. His field was inundated, his field was flooded. A farmer that plants crops, and the spring flood comes and floods the field, it ruins the crops. The crops don't grow, it washes away the seed and everything. His field has been inundated. It's his hard luck. From now on, you got to feed me, even if I got sick. So, Omar, if you want to fight, Omar Lay, she can say to him, inundated, has been flooded. It's his hard luck. Nido Mahu. What is the case in which he becomes a menstruant? She starts bleeding. Now, a lady, when she starts bleeding, doesn't feel good, and she doesn't want to go through a wedding at that time. She can. If a Jewish girl has a menstrual period, she can go through a wedding. You don't have to postpone the wedding. You don't have to go on great financial response. A loss could be involved there. It's just that you can't live with the wife yet until she has the end of the period. She counts 7 days when she doesn't have any bleeding, and then she goes to a kosher mikveh. But the wedding can go through, which you usually have at a wedding, in addition to the ceremony. You have where the bride and groom are yichud. They're left alone in a room for about 10-15 minutes. And the witnesses that witness the wedding witness that too. And that, according to the Rambam, is considered kupo. But at any rate, here, if she became a menstruant, what's the shas vessel? So at a time when the ordinary period would come, lo tiborloko, it shouldn't be a problem to you. The lo motzi can say to him, your field has been inundated because this is the ordinary situation. This was anticipated. When is it a question to you? Shloso. At a time when she has a period that doesn't come at a regular time. Most ladies, when they're of childbearing age, have a period in a sequence of
a monthly sequence. Some ladies have it every 25 days, some have it every 30 days, some every 35 days, in that range. And if they have it 3 times in a row, with that 35 days interval between the steeing and the stopping, that establishes a chazok, a fixed period. And the Gemara discusses how you count these things. And the Kitchi Shulchan Aruch in English discusses how it's counted. So it's not that complicated. Perhaps it's a question to you when it's not in the time of a regular period. What's the law? Is this considered an accident that he doesn't have to? Even the law of Shas B'Sosa, since it wasn't at the time of the regular period, having Motzi Omer Lei, perhaps she could say to him, the Staplos today, perhaps, even if there are ladies that do change their menstrual periods, Shas B'Sosa has the same law as the regular time of period. That she can't say to him, your father's pill has been inundated. If I wants to answer this difficulty, it says, it says in the Mimer that we quoted from Rabbi Yehuda Mishwal, when the time comes, the fixed time comes to get married, and he doesn't marry her, she is entitled to eat from him. He's got to feed her from that point on. The reason that he has to feed her is because we say that a Jewish husband has an obligation to feed his wife. And he can't wiggle out of the obligation by not going through the ceremony. We will put that on him. He's got to feed her from that point on. And she also can eat truma from that point on if she tried to marry a kohen. It says lokatoni. It doesn't say that the women are stopping the procedure. Aloni so. It's saying that the man is stopping the procedure. And if he's stopping the procedure, he's still obligated to pay. The Gemara says, how are we talking here? Another idiomatic expression is how dummy is this like? But it means, how are we talking here? Either from if the withholding of getting married is herself, the lady, why should she be able to eat from him and eat from his truma? She's stopping the procedure. Why should she get the benefit of not marrying him and still force him to feed her? Allowed, perhaps it must be the onis, there was some kind of an accident. Like we have explained above, these types of accidents, and yet we learn with truma. She can eat from him and she can eat from truma. I'll say to you, any accident, whether it's a physical ailment or whatever it is, that doesn't permit a person to go through with the wedding, there is no obligation for the would-be husband to feed the wife in the interim time. In other words, we say there is such a concept as if there was an accident occurred, this frees a person from the obligation that he had ordinarily would have been ready to assume. Inu, and we're talking about cases even where the husband was stopping the wedding. And yet he's freed from it if it's an accident beyond his control. He gets sick. Does he want to get sick? God forbid. He doesn't want to get sick. But he can't go through the wedding. We're not going to force him to feed her until they actually do get married. But and the truth is, we can learn, and the law is, we could have learned that he stopped the procedure, and still we don't force him to feed her because it was an accident. But the reason we learned lo niso in the Mishnah of Besula Nisas, since we learned the first part of the Mishnah talking about a female, we learned also the second part of the Mishnah talking about a female. All right. So this concept of an accident occurring frees the person from the obligation to feed the would-be wife. Now, we've established that. I'm going to go further, gentlemen, because I'm going to repeat all this tomorrow when Mr. Ellis shows up. You'll just get a benefit of the first point time over. Now that we know the law that a accident frees would-be husband from any obligation to feed the wife until they actually do get married, does the same concept apply to divorces? This we're talking about kedushin, marriage. What about what if a person gives a divorce paper to his wife? Well, nowadays, when you give a divorce paper to your wife, if God forbid it comes to such a thing, you give a divorce paper in front of the Beis Din, there is an immediate divorce taking place. And that's fine. But what if some people want to go and postpone the effectiveness of divorce until some future date? And what if, for instance, he makes a condition that unless this happens, she will not be divorced? In other words, he's going through the motions, but he says it is conditioned about something happening in the future. The question is, do we say that a complaint, that an accident that stops something from coming to pass would stop the operation of a divorce once you start the divorce paper? Omar Rabbi says, in relation to the subject matter of divorces, any kind of thing that stops the person from going through with divorce ain't okay. The law is not that way. We do say, if a person gives a divorce on a condition, say for instance a condition that I won't come until a certain period of time, say 30 days, and he has an accident, he's not able to come, we consider that a full divorce, and we don't say that he can say, I was an accident, I couldn't make it. It's not the same thing. Alma Kesuvos Rabbi, so therefore we see that Rabbi holds, there's no complaint, there's no statement of an accident that will stop the operation of a divorce. We'll try to go and find out the reason. Why is this so? Why do we say by case of marriage, a claim of accident frees him from the obligation to feed a prospective wife, but in the case of a divorce, no excuse will free him of letting the divorce go through. We'll try to find the reason why. So the Gemara is going to go and ask several questions, and each one they're going to go and say, that's not a proof. How do we know that Rabbi holds that if you try to make a divorce on a condition, and even if there was an accident that you couldn't fulfill the condition, the divorce is still considered final? Well, if you say it from the Snan, a person says to his wife, this is your divorce. If I don't finish within 12 months, if I don't come back here, and what happens? So he dies within the 12-month period. Is he going to come back? No way is he going to come back. He's dead. And a dead person can't divorce anybody. Ain't no get. We say there in that Mishnah, there is no divorce because she's a widow. She can't be divorced by a dead man. So presumably from that Mishnah, we can learn out a deduction. Meis who the ain't no get. If he died, it's not considered a divorce. Oh, so look, but what if he got sick and he couldn't come back within 12 months? Hari's again. Perhaps this is a divorce. In other words, the complaint that he was an accident will not stop the divorce from being final. You get that? The Gemara says, it says there that if he died within the 12 months, it's not a divorce, because a dead man can't divorce anybody. But assuming if he died within 12 months, he made a condition. This is your divorce unless I return within 12 months. He's going on a trip. And he goes to New York, and he doesn't come back here, and he dies in New York. Wherever he goes. So the Mishnah says there that it's not a divorce, because he can't divorce anybody. So we learned from that Mishnah, perhaps we learned from that Mishnah a deduction.
It wasn't sound. His proposal wasn't sound.
Because it was, if he had lived.
If he had lived and he had returned within 12, the divorce would not be final. But here, we say that it's not a divorce. Presumably, only that great thing of death occurred. But what if he got sick, which is not a death? Perhaps that might be a good excuse for it being a divorce. And this is a proof that of accident cannot stop the operation of a divorce. In this case, of getting sick. The Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Why? The Dilma Olam, perhaps I can always say to you, even if he got sick, it wouldn't be a divorce. If he got sick within that 12-month period, he couldn't return. The higuva kamashmo. And all it's coming to tell us is what's in. Look inside. Ain't get lachamisa. There's no such thing as a divorce after death. He says, this will be a divorce if I return here within 12 months. But he didn't. Presumably, maybe that's a divorce. He says, no. He's saying there's no such thing as a divorce after death. He says maybe that's a proof that it would be a divorce, and you can't say that accident that stopped me from coming here because I was sick is sufficient excuse. Maybe that's where Rova holds it in, that there's no complaint of accident that can stop the operation of divorce. And Bar says, no, that's not so. Perhaps that's what it's coming to tell us in that Mishnah, is that you can't have a divorce after death. Person's dead, he can't do anything. He's dead. And there's no longer any possibility of divorce becoming final. The Gemara says, ain't get lachamisa, a concept you want. You think that Mishnah is going to tell us there's no such thing as divorce after death? Well, Tonim Leirachia, we learned it in an earlier Mishnah in nonsense. How do we learn that? This is what the earlier Mishnah said. If a person uses any of these languages, this is your divorce. Mosi, if I should die, he's sick, and he thinks he's going to die, so he wants his wife to be divorced from him rather than be and perhaps or not.
What? Does he want to divorce her so she won't inherit him, or does he want to divorce her?
And he doesn't want her to be at the mercy of his surviving brother. He wants her to be divorced rather than says, this is your divorce, mosi, if I die from this sickness. Or he says the language, this is your divorce, if I get from this sickness, if I die. Same kind of language. Or a third way. The halacha is, he said nothing. It has no legal effect. Because once he's dead, everything stops. He can't divorce anybody. A dead person. Yeah, that is a cross-reference to Ein Mishpat, Ner Mitzvah, an extreme right-hand corner of your page. And that gives you quotations from the various places. That little Gimel, I'm reading it, Gimel, it says in Maimonides, that's in the Mishnah Torah of and also Smag, the Sefer Mitzvah Gedolah, another Rishon, Sham, and also Sham, and Sim in chapter 145, the first paragraph. And there you can look in the Shulchan Aruch, and they'll tell you that is, there might be some other authorities that contradict them. So, but this is the case in many cases.
All these little letters are just references to these other halacha.
Yeah, that's a cross-reference.
That's the only use those letters have. Little letters.
Yeah, that's right. Those little letters.
Okay.
This is from the Margit. The other side, on the other side, in the left-hand, extreme left-hand corner, you'll see a little star, and way in the left-hand corner it tells you where you can find it in the Gemara Gita. These are cross-references. That's right. Every one of these are our Mishnah that we're quoting here is the only ones to contradict our sages. The Sanya, we learn in the Brisa, a person that says, if I don't return until a certain time, there were some of our sages that said, permitted him to marry on the strength of that divorce. And we're not holding like that opinion, and therefore we say you cannot marry on the strength of that divorce. We say, Man Rabbeinu, who are our rabbis, and that this is a good divorce. The Jewish tradition, they permitted oils prepared by non-Jews to be utilized for Yosef. They all held it Rabbi Yosef, the Omar, the time written in a document is a proof that it was to be taking effect immediately upon that date. So even though the language was from this date until 12 months later, it means it takes effect. So we still don't have a proof to the statement that a complaint of an accident will stop the effectiveness of a divorce. We learned from another Mishnah. If you have the language from now on, if I don't come to here, until the end of 12, within the 12 months, how is that again? It is a divorce. He's a dead man, he can't divorce. So we learn from that base, when he dies, it's a divorce. The same law would apply perhaps to the Pula when he gets sick. The Gemara says no.
Oh, they said it's
No,
not?
it is a divorce. It's a divorce.
Oh.
Because the word now on, that means it takes effect immediately. Just like Rabbi Yosef says, when you put a time, that means it takes effect immediately. So when you use the word, that means it also takes effect immediately.
The divorce is from what time?
From the time of writing it, not 12 months later. That's more, Demo may stop you. Maybe only when a person dies do we say it's considered a divorce. Why? He doesn't want his wife to fall into the mercy of his surviving brother. But if he got sick, he didn't want her to be divorced because he still loves her. So we still have no proof to Rava's concept that a person that makes a condition and doesn't fulfill it because of an accident, that he stops the operation of divorce. Perhaps from this other case, we have another case. A person says to the Bez Yomi, if I don't return right back here, on the end of 30 days, it should be considered a divorce. In other words, if I return back within 30 days, it's not a divorce. But if I don't return back within 30 days, it's a divorce. It takes effect. But if I do turn back in 30 days, it's so Tilsin Yomi. He comes at the end of 30 days, and it's like, say for instance, there is gentlemen, there's two cities on the Mississippi River, let's say East St. Louis and St. Louis. One is on the Illinois side and the other one's on the Missouri side. I don't know if you've ever been in St. Louis during the spring floods. It goes so high that even the expressway is just barely above the surface of water. It inundates all the islands in the river. It's the depth of the Mississippi at that time is maybe 60 or 70 feet.
What's it like in Williams now?
How
many feet extra is that?
I would say it's about 50 feet higher than the ordinary channel. So it comes at the end of 30 days, Opaski Mabra, and the ferry boat that's going to take him across to the final thing. He's in East St. Louis. Beis Din is sitting in St. Louis. Ferry boat stops. It stopped because of the spring floods. So he's on East St. Louis and he shouts across the river. He sees the rabbis there. He didn't quite make it. He couldn't get on the other side. Well, you won't find the oral Torah me by a person shebikesh oneg olam that seeks pleasures of the world, tavo passions, v'koved and honor, v'gedula and greatness olam hazeh in this world. Elo, where do you find the person that has this knowledge? A person that's almost literally killing himself on it. Shenemar, Torah, this is the Torah Odom, a person. He Yomus Bo'ol, when he dies in a tent. And O'ol means the O'ol of learning. Kak Darko Shatorah, and then we have a Mishnah in all those. This is the way, it's actually a Brisa in all those, the sixth chapter. This is the way of the Torah. You should eat bread with salt, mayim, and meshura, tishta, and water with a measured amount, drink. In other words, you live a very simple type of life. Shown, if God forbid you have to sleep on the earth, you sleep. And you live a life of pain. But you must learn Torah very much. Very hard. The word omel means very hard work. And then the mimer says in the Brisa, in the 6th chapter of Avos, if you do that, you'll be happy in this world as well as the world to come. Fine. The Fishloch, God did not make an agreement, literally a covenant with Israel, only by virtue of the oral Torah. This is the agreement with God. On the mouth of these words, I cut with you a covenant. Amru Chazal, and our sages say, Lo kosav HaKadosh Baruch Hu Torah. God doesn't write in the Torah Alaman Hadaborim because of these words. He didn't say because of these words. And he didn't say because of these words. And he didn't say the consequence of these words. He's mentioning the mount. Zuhi Torah Shabbat, talking about the Torah that comes from the mount, the oral law. It's hard to, this gentleman you're getting to come constant about, it's hard to, it's compared, it's a parable to darkness. People that walk in darkness. They will see a great light. Yeshaya test. Elo Bali HaTalmud. These are the people that are learning Gemara. Sharo or Godol. They will see a great light. Sha'akorish Baruch Hu Meir Einayim. God will lighten their eyes. God will open your eyes. If you throw yourself into the learning of Gemara, God will open up your eyes and you will see the great chokhmah of God's wisdom. And that He does it to every person that really sincerely studies Torah with the proper fear of and awe of God. The Easter, the Heter, you understand the difference between what is prohibited, what's permissible with the Torah, what is unclean, and what is clean according to the halacha. Shivavo, in the future to come. Those that love, God loves, are like the going out of the sun, the Guraso, in its greatness, in its strength. When the sun is rising, it becomes stronger and stronger. Shoftim Hey. Torah, and the Jewish people did not accept the Torah until God put the mountain like a barrel over their heads. The Tachti Tahor, they stood under the mountain, literally under the mountain. And the Gemara talks about it, Shabbos, that from here we are, that this is a protest against the willingness of the Jewish people to accept the Torah. They were forced to do it. But then they says, even though that may be true, that later on, in the time of Achashverosh and Russia, they reiterated their commitment to accept God's Torah, and there they did it willingly, because it's either you accept the Torah and get God's protection, or you're dying. So again...
How was that arranged, by the way? I never heard details of that.
We'll learn the Gemara in Shabbos. We learned it, you remember? That's the trouble. You've been missing a lot of things here. I've been telling you this for a long time. I'm not just flapping my lips. I'm telling you something that's emes. Rabbi Dima says the name of the son of Im Kabaltem, Makablim, Atem Es HaTorah. If you accept the Torah, Mutal will be good. Im Lav, if not, Shom Tehei Uraschem, there will be your grave. If you will say, perhaps it means that on the written Torah that He put the mountain of them over them. The Torah isn't true. When God said, will you accept the Torah? Kulam, they all answered, Nishma, we will do, and we will listen. So they were acceptable. There is not much hard work in learning Tanakh. It's simple Hebrew there. And there's not too much pain there. The Hebrew, it's very little. Not some parts of Tanakh is pretty hard to learn. God was telling them the Torah.
But it didn't happen yet.
The truth is, there was and ever will be was Seder Sinai. I've made notes on this. I've called out through Shas. They should publish it. I'm just putting them down in order. That's one I finished a little bit about. Nothing is really finished, but they learned the principles because they were taught by prophets. They were prophets. They were teaching them what would be. Even the Noah Torah before it was given, so no problem. He said to them, Al Torah Shabbat Peh, Kalos Chamurus. There is the specifics of the commandments, the easier ones and the more difficult ones. The He Kamovas, it's harsh as death. The Kosher Kishol and as hard as the grave, and also to acquire it. Fisha Ein Lomedo saw, because learns the Gemara. Only one that loves God with all his heart, with all his soul, and all his might. That's the perfect people that learn God's Gemara. Only these such types. Shenamar, and that's what we're required to do in the Kriya Shema, the first part of the Kriya Shema. The afterwards said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. God says, how do you know that this love is Elo Loshen Talmud? It means the language of learning Gemara. That's what it means. To love God. See what's written afterward. The second part, it says that. And these things should be upon you, what I command you today, on your heart. The age is that, what's that? Talmud. This is talking about the Gemara. It's on the heart, it's on the intelligence of a person. Because you're learning Torah, learning Gemara, you have to learn with Kop, with your intelligence, otherwise you don't grasp it. You should teach it diligently to your children. It requires diligence. You cannot learn it unless you sharp understand the consequences. The Malachot teach you, Ein bo pirush matan schora v'olam hazeh. There's no explanation of any reward given in this world for fulfilling that. Even though it says you've got to go all out in serving God. It says in the second part of the Kriya Shema, if you will listen, you'll have your range at proper time, and you have the other things. I will give the reins of your land. So, what's the second part of the Kriya Shema talking about? Mitzvahs. This is the reward given to people that engage in other mitzvahs other than learning Torah. Here, Torah Shabbat, or fulfilling the Torah, the written Torah. But again, I can't fulfill the written Torah unless you know what it means. Shein Oskin but Talmud, but they're not learning Gemara. In the second part of the Kriya Shema, Kesuvos written, "Bo follow out heart with all your soul, come and does it with all your might." The Malachot to teach you, Shekol Misho, Ohi, anybody that loves Osher, Latanu, get pleasure, go Torah Shabbat Peh. He cannot really learn the oral Torah, the Gemara, the Fisheyesh Bo Tsar Godol, because there's a lot of pain attached to learning the Gemara. When neither cheap, sometimes you lose a lot of sleep over it. The person has to really make himself humble, lower himself on it. Therefore, the reward given for such a person is the world to come, because such a dedication, such a sacrifice in this world deserves a reward in it. Because this is not a reward that is fitting to give now. Because such a person is going all out in the service of God.
Well, what people to whom it comes naturally.
Wonderful. Halavai, you should all have that.
This kind of the average person.
Some of the average type, of course. People that walk in darkness, will see a great light. What is Or Gadol? Or Shedivra Berishon, the light that was created in the first day, Shedgon Torah Shabbat Peh. That God set it aside for those that work hard in the oral Torah, that's in the Gemara. The Yom of Alayla, day and night. She was Chuson, because of their merit, the merit of the people that learn Torah Shabbat Peh, the Medrash, the Gemara, and the Talmud Literature, all of them, the world continues to exist. Here it is, gentlemen. This is the most important thing. And I wanted you to learn this Medrash because unless you learned the Medrash and saw it with yourself, you wouldn't believe that this would be the case. But in fact it is. Shemar, if I did not have the covenant of day and night, what's the covenant of day and night? We'll learn Torah day and night. Would not have set up the statutes of heaven and earth. In other words, the whole world is dependent upon these individual Jews that are dedicated to
he wouldn't have created the laws of natural order? He wouldn't have created the universe?
He wouldn't have created anything.
You start referring to the laws by which everything works.
Everything. Okay, we'll hold this point. There's no greater standard in learning Gemara. The Gemara teaches you how to think in proper terms as far as the halacha is concerned of the Torah. And this is what we're trying to learn. We're trying to learn how to learn. Is there anybody that could say the Mishnah? Sometimes means occasionally, but in this particular case it means twice during the week. Bote dini. That means Jewish rabbinical. Yeah, that's what it is. If he has a complaint against her virginity, in other words, contract rights are concerned, she would be entitled to it if she did not defraud her husband. But if he feels that he was defrauded, he comes to the Bezdin, investigates it, and if we can bring witnesses, reliable witnesses, as to what occurred, the matter will be clarified. We're worried about that perhaps she committed adultery between the first stage of marriage and the second stage. In the earlier days, they used to separate the first and second stage of marriage between 30 days to up to a year to give the lady a chance to gather together. And there would be a time to be unfaithful to her husband. Nowadays, we have both ceremonies. The first stage of ceremony, which is called Kedushin or Erisine, interchangeably, or the second stage, Chuppah and Nisuin, take place one right after another in the same ceremony. So there's no possibility of an unfaithfulness nowadays. So this is something that occurred during the time that there was that possibility. All right, Joe, could you say the Gemara? All right, Joseph Jacobs, you say it.
Horanas.
Yes.
Sorry. Swing. Rish. Nasaro. Zonos Lachach. Shanina Basula. Tali Tanya. Lo Tanya. Hey Tanya. Hey Lodli Tanya. Zimafarish Tama. But the Tanya of the Lemafarish Tama. Ela Yisma. Hachi Yisma. Lo Tanas Basulim. Al Mashkin Vestin. Shaktu Hachaim Alt Takaras Manas Yisrael. Oh, here. Hey Torah, Shlosha Yecha b'Shabbos, v'Sheni b'Shabbos, v'Shlishi b'Shabbos, Uri Tansa.
You know what you said?
Let's try it. She said that Shmuel said, from what do we learn? From what do we say that a virgin is required second stage of marriage on the marriage?
It's married on the first day.
Because we learned, the time comes and he doesn't marry her, she eats from his and she eats from his truma. If it's a fault of his, if the time passed, and
if he doesn't marry her on the appointed time, when does she eat truma?
Kohen, only the Kohen.
If you marry an ordinary Jew, is she eat truma?
I'm sorry.
Well, translate
from Yechol is what?
You would think
the spot when the time came in the first of the day.
What
the day we know Sunday, the day after Shabbos. Yeah, the first day of the week. He would give her food. He would have to feed her. Therefore, it says a virgin is married the fourth day to let you know that he wouldn't have to feed her.
All right, now Rabbi Yosef is quoting. He's leaving out a key phrase that's found in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the reason that a person has to go and get married on the fourth day of the week, in case he should find that there's something wrong, he can rise up early in the morning the following day, which is Thursday morning, and go before the Beis Din and complain. He leaves out that key phrase in the Maimer he quotes from Rabbi Yehuda. And now he had been sick, so he catches himself, and he's like we say, "Oh God." He realized that he had left out a key phrase, and he said to ask himself questions. The first question he asked, Tanya, am I hanging something that we learned, our Mishnah, with something we didn't learn? The Maimer of Rabbi Yehuda. Then he asked the second question, Hey Tanya, hey Lo Tanya, the Mishnah we learned, and the Maimer of Rabbi Yehuda we didn't learn? And then he answers, Mishmor we learned. But this is the question. You're explaining something that explains the reason why you have to get married on the fourth day of the week. It's in order to rise up early in the morning on the fifth day, Thursday morning, to go to the time level first time. What I say that I'm quoting from Yurish, that doesn't explain that. So therefore, I left out a key phrase. I have to correct myself. He eats more, but if I learn. This is the way I've learned. Why do we say that a virgin should get married on the fourth day of the week? That phrase. If he does have a complaint against her virginity, he didn't find it, or a mashkin Beis Din, he can rise up early to the Beis Din. So the Gemara now, he corrected himself. So the Gemara asks about Shabbos. Just like the reason he can marry on the fourth day of the week because he can get up early on the next day, the Thursday morning, come to the Beis Din, but he'll also be able to get married on the first day of the week and get up early in the morning, come on Monday morning, because the Beis Din was meeting both on Monday morning as well as Thursday morning. If he has a complaint against her virginity, the Gemara answers, the first day of the week we rule out. Why? The sages were anxious and protective. Zakonos B'nos Israel to fix up the thing for the daughters of Israel, which they hate, that they couldn't bother the Suda to prepare the wedding feast, Shlosha Yomim, at least 3 days. After Shabbos, the first day of the week, Sheni Shabbos, the third day of the week, Rabbi Kotzah, and the fourth day you can get married. All right. Now we've established that the rabbis have set up a rule, and in those days, nowadays, of course, we get married any time. Because we got refrigeration, you can prepare a meal anytime, or you can even pay for it by the caterers, and they'll charge an arm and a leg, but they'll prepare it any day of the week that you want it. But at any rate, so now we want to know, what are we going to do now? I'm learning a new Gemara. And now, the Gemara says, now. Word Akshov means and now. Shesharnino Shachtu. And now that we learn that this concept of being diligent, the rabbis, that's the reason why the rabbis wanted to make it on Wednesday, because you have 3 days after Shabbos to prepare for the meal. Shonio gives Bamel soul, and this is we learned. If the time came, say for instance, they said if you get married on November the 1st, right? Loni so he didn't marry her. Ochos Mishalo, she can eat from him. Ochos Truma, and she can eat Truma if he happens to be a Kohen, because he did not live up to his agreement. So he gives Bam the After Shabbos. If the appointed time came on the first day of the week, Sunday, marry her, because the rabbis won't permit it to be married except on Wednesday. He doesn't have to go and feed her in the interim time before they get married. Why? Because we say this is not his doing. It's called an onus. It's something beyond his capacity. He has no say into it. He cannot make a decision. The rabbis won't permit him to get married except on Wednesday. So now we've established this concept that if you have some accident occur, in this particular case, the decree of the rabbis, that you can't get married on any day of the week except Wednesday. If he made arrangements to get married any other time, he should be forgiven for that arrangement, because he can't fulfill it. It's against his will. It's not that he wants to go propose upon it. He didn't really intend to do it. So now the Gemara is going to probe and see how far does this go. If you can't do something that you promised to do, how far are you forgiven for fulfilling your responsibilities? Therefore, the Gemara is figuring out. He's saying, therefore, what if he was sick? The reason he couldn't get married is not because necessarily he was sick on the Wednesday, but they had to get married. Or she became sick. Sometimes people get sick, and they can have a tremendous fever. There's no intent to hold the wedding. What is there? Or his wife becomes a menstruant. She wanted to get married on a time when she wasn't bleeding, in a period, but she became a menstruant. She started bleeding, and a lady feels very uncomfortable when she's going through this period. He doesn't have to feed her for postponing. He doesn't feed her because it was an accident. Since we say that an accident, that because of the decree of the rabbis forgives them from the obligation to feed a wife, so any other kind of accident, a sickness, or having a period, should also forgive him the obligation to it. In other words, a complaint, a statement that there was an accident occurring, and this is sufficient to forgive him for his fulfilling his obligation. It's called an accident. The Torah forgives you. Patri forgives you. The Torah forgives you for an accident. For instance, the Gemara talks about what if a lady, should never happen, is walking in a field and some man jumps on her and rapes her. The man, she was already married to another man, so the man that raped her is to be put to death. But she is not to be put to death because she was raped. It was not her willing to be raped. You understand? It was an accident. So we say a general rule that the Torah learned from this, that if there's some kind of thing that against a person's will, he is freed from any obligations because of the postponement. All right, now the Gemara is going to probe. We're going to repeat this again tomorrow. The Gemara probe it and say, how far do you go to forgive a person for an accident, to get him out of his obligation? He makes an obligation to get married, and all of a sudden he's not a boy. There are others that ask a question in this area. If he became sick,